Hello and welcome back to the balcony for another book review by me, Ben Wray. It's getting a bit chillier here in the Basque Country. I've got my jumper on now, but I'm here to bring you a very interesting review. Yanis Varoufakis' Technofeudalism, published by Penguin on the 26th of September. I managed to get a hold of an advance copy for you guys, although I didn't manage to really get the review out, in time for the publication of the book, so it's coming to you now. Nevertheless, this is a very interesting book. I think it's sparking quite a lot of debate about the nature of capitalism, or is it even capitalism anymore when we talk about the global economy, the global system that we live in. Now, before we get into the book, it's important to say something about the author, Yanis Varoufakis. Varoufakis was a little-known economist until his critique of austerity in Greece propelled him to national importance. He would go on to become the finance minister for the Syriza government in 2015, but it was a short-lived spell. He quit the government after Syriza capitulated to the Troika and the austerity agenda. Post-2015, after his phase as finance minister, Varoufakis has grown more radical. He's become more sceptical about the possibility of reforming the European Union. He says it's not viable any longer, and he takes harder positions on questions such as in the recent Israeli siege on Gaza. For many leftists, Varoufakis remains what he once described himself, an erratic Marxist that takes wayward and sometimes confused positions on issues. Another way of looking at it is that Varoufakis is a very dynamic thinker. He's not tied to dogmas and therefore can adapt himself to rapidly changing circumstances. That's important for understanding techno-feudalism because it's a very ambitious theory of what's happened to capitalism, that it actually no longer exists. It's capital itself which has destroyed the system. Is Varoufakis right? Has capital destroyed capitalism? Well, let me first give you a crash course in Varoufakis' theory. For Varoufakis, the logic of the global system is no longer driven by markets and profits, which he describes as capitalism's two main pillars. Markets have been sidelined because the global economy is now dominated by a series of overlapping monopolies, from Google in the West to WeChat in China. Profit is no longer key because the largest firms make their money through extracting digital rents for their control over information systems and data. While profit and digital rent might not seem too dissimilar superficially, the key difference is that profit is vulnerable to market competition, whereas rent is not. Whereas traditional capital made money through exploiting workers, cloud capital reproduces itself without paying us anything. It just does it through its control and ownership of data. We are therefore cloud serfs, according to Varoufakis. Our unpaid labour reproduces cloud capital through scrolling through Google Maps or producing content for YouTube, as I'm actually doing right now. Even traditional businesses like toy manufacturers or book publishers are nothing more than modern-day vassals, according to Varoufakis. They are unable to exist in the market without paying a digital rent to the likes of Amazon in the West or Alibaba in China. Now, why can't we just call these developments an evolution of capitalism in the digital age, like the commonly used term platform capitalism? Varoufakis argues that language is important, and by using the language of techno-feudalism, we're more clearly identifying the way in which capitalism is evolving and the threats it holds for humanity at large. Techno-feudalism is breeding geopolitical conflict between China and the USA and is a barrier to the reduction of carbon emissions worldwide. Philosophically, he wants to reorientate left politics towards a humanist agenda of freedom and liberation from an ever smaller band of cloud elites who control our lives. He ends with the rousing statement that to control our minds individually, We need to control cloud capital collectively. Now, there's a lot to like about technofeudalism. First of all, Varoufakis is extremely readable. This is a book of abstract concepts, but he manages to make it a really interesting, engaging story that's very difficult to put down once you've got started. Secondly, Varoufakis is identifying real trends, many of which the left is missing altogether, or at best paying little attention to. Some of these trends are really irrefutable. First of all, that platforms like Facebook and Google are massive rentiers. They do control our lives, not just economically, but also culturally and politically. And that rent is becoming an ever more important part of the global economy as wealth inequality grows. And also, it's clearly the case that market competition is in decline. It is increasingly difficult to see how these companies compete against each other when they have such monopoly control. Because many leftists are still using the language of free markets. Talking about free market capitalism doesn't really make any sense when you look at how the global economy works today, how power works in the global system today. That we should be using a different language to talk about the global economy today. We should be talking about the unfreedom of being controlled by various shades of economic oligarchy. Now, with all of that said, technofeudalism does leave me with some questions. The least convincing part of the book is when Varoufakis develops the concept of cloud serfs. I just can't get on board with the idea that when I'm messaging my mum on WhatsApp, that's a form of unpaid labour. I agree that platforms' proprietary ownership of our data is a huge problem. I think it's better to think about data as tracking our activity, and it's something that should be in common ownership and common control rather than controlled and extracted by corporations. I think this is a better way to think about data than as a form of labour, which lends itself to the idea that we should be commodifying it, when actually we should be using our data for collective good, to solve collective problems. Secondly, I think the concept of technofeudalism comes up against some problems when we look at the question of the labour market. Whereas workers in the feudal era were tied to a particular piece of land, which they couldn't leave, they couldn't move to another piece of land. Under the current economy, workers have the right to move between different jobs for different capitalists. Clearly that's the case even for modern forms of work like the gig economy, if you're working for Amazon and what's called digital Taylorism. Varoufakis describes in the book these types of work as cloud proles, but that's got nothing to do with feudalism. You can move between, and gig workers often do, move between jobs very freely. And therefore there's a problem there because labour, our work, is obviously fundamental to how we understand the nature of the economy. And that doesn't really fit to me within a techno-feudal paradigm. And that relates to Varoufakis' conclusions, because he's very keen when he's talking about the potential for revolutionary change to play down the role of the worker. Now, while Varoufakis is clearly right to say that Marx's prediction that the spread of the proletariat around the world would lead to its homogenization and a more clear divide between capitalist and labour has not come true, that doesn't lead me to conclude that the global working class is still not going to be a pivotal player if any revolutionary change is possible. And cloud capital relies on long supply chains where there's potential crunch points for workers to leverage power. Moreover, I still think there's hope that as the neoliberal system breaks down and competition between nation states grows, the ability for the working class to exercise power can potentially grow with that. Neoliberalism has been an especially bad period for working class power, but because the global system's constantly evolving and cracks are without a doubt growing, there's potential openings there. There will be a tendency among many leftists to respond defensively to Varoufakis' argument. After all, if you've been fighting capitalism your whole life and someone comes along and tells you that it doesn't actually exist anymore without you even noticing, there might be a tendency to feel like, this can't possibly be true. I don't think that defensiveness is very helpful. Even if you don't agree with all of Varoufakis' thesis, and I've just said I find aspects of it unconvincing, you have to say that the aspects of the global economy that he's pointing to and drawing attention to are undoubtedly things that the left needs to put more attention on. There's no doubt that the global system is increasingly authoritarian, is increasingly oligarchic, that data is playing a role of creating economic entities with enormous power in which we have reduced leverage to effect. And Varoufakis is right to raise the question, can democracy actually survive in the context of such concentrated economic power? Whether we call it technofeudalism, platform capitalism, or any other name, we should actually know and understand our enemy and build a politics and a program that can respond accordingly. That's it from this book review from the balcony. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, give it a share, and I'll see you next time.